give everybody a few minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Team, shall we get started or wait a little bit longer? How close are we?
Let's wait just another minute or so.
You got it.
We're really close to having most folks here.
Happy to.
It looks like we've got a pretty good share now, so why don't you go ahead and start, Ryan?
Okay, happy to. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Estrellado, and I'm the Director of Data Programs at the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data. And I want to welcome you to our 5th eTranscript Task Force meeting. The task force, of course, is to discuss and share ideas on topics related to the expansion of eTranscript and lifting barriers for students who are applying for college and preparing for life after high school. And this is our 5th one today. So the first one was about the governor's executive order and how that connects to the Cradle-to-Career, Office of Cradle-to-Career Data's work on scaling eTranscript. The second was on dual enrollment and related challenges. The third was on A to G course requirements and college requirements. Fourth was credit for prior learning. And then, of course, today is our 5th one where we'll be talking about skills first hiring. So I want to once again thank everyone for being here, with special thanks to our task force members for taking the time again to do this conversation with us. And with that, I will hand it over to Kathy.
Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. In a moment, I'll be explaining for members of the public who are joining us how they can participate and ask questions. And then what we're going to be doing is giving you a little bit of a background about what the concept of a career passport is and why we're talking about that related to eTranscript California. We have 2 guest speakers today. The first is Amber Garrison Duncan, who's coming from the Competency-Based Education Network, or CBEN. She'll be giving us a national perspective on these issues. And then we're going to pivot here to California, where James Regan, who works with the Government Operations Agency, will talk about some work underway in the state to start with skills first hiring. Then we're going to talk about some possible solutions for what we could be doing here in California. And then we're going to open it up to an interactive session where you'll have an opportunity to share your thoughts about ways that this kind of technology would be useful in the context of your organization. And then in addition to that, we'll really be thinking about what the recommendations should be going forward for the state of California. Next slide. So for those of you who are members of the public, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see 2 little bubbles that says Q&A. That's our question and answer feature. At any point during today's meeting, you can go ahead and type questions in there. We'll have a team that will be answering some things as they can in that text format. And then in addition, they'll be elevating questions for a larger discussion with the group. You're also welcome to submit formal public comment to info@c2c.ca.gov. Next slide. All right. So as you recall, we had to come up with this graphic to try to look at all of the complex relationships about how information needs to flow for us to be able to help understand the learning and the skills that people have gained in a variety of contexts. So this is our full picture that's in the image right now. And then if you will click on it once, we'll show where we are headed today. So what we're going to be talking about today is the concept of a career passport. And this is basically a place where we would bring together the types of academic transcript data that we've been talking about over the last several sessions with information that would be useful when employers are vetting a potential employee to figure out if they're going to have the skills that are needed. And sometimes that documentation of skills happens outside of an academic setting. Next slide. So why are we talking about the career passport now as part of eTranscript California? This really begins with the executive order that the governor created last August related to creating a master plan on career education. And some of the things that he highlighted in his comments was how important it was that we really are honoring the fact that there is learning that happens both inside and outside of the classroom, and that that information needs to be shared, not just with education institutions, but also with employers. And that means that we have to be looking closely at the skills that are the intersection between what people know and what employers need when somebody comes to do a job. Next slide. So he termed this a career passport. And so this is not actually a term that's used in the larger community. There is a term, these terms are constantly evolving. Right now, the term that's used the most often is a learning and employment record, or LER, but they're really kind of the same thing. So the idea is that we're going to expand upon a traditional academic transcript to find a way where we can record the marketable work skills and experience that someone might have developed in other places. So that could be an apprenticeship, an internship, on the job. It could also be documentation of learning through badges or industry certifications. There's a variety of ways that people have attempted to codify the skills that people have learned. So if we were going to create some new mechanism where we could share both academic information and other certifications of skills, the problem is that we have two issues that we have to address simultaneously. The first is basically systems change. So it could be great to create some new way of sharing information. You could think about portfolios and other things that people have come up with, or even the evolution of the badging movement in general. But if the employers don't have a way to accept that information and determine its relevance to their work, it's not likely going to change anything related to hiring. And in fact, we've seen that a little bit in practice already as employers have thought more about skills, is that they may be saying that they want to have more skills to inform their hiring, but in practice, we're seeing they're still really relying on academic credentials. And that's because we don't have the system. So if you've got a big screening thing that's at like a large employer and it's going to look for that bachelor's degree as its first criterion, we're not going to get very far. And the second is just the technology integration. How in the world are we going to pull together all the diverse transcripting services that exist across all forms of public education and private education, and bring in these other types of information into one thing that can be passed coherently and then ingested by HR systems? So those are our two problems we're trying to solve. Next slide. So with that in mind, I'm really curious to hear from all of you. So I'm wondering if any of you ever got a job based on skills that were definitely things that you had not learned in an academic setting, and how did you share those skills? So I welcome you to come off mute or to type this in chat, just to share whether you've had this experience of a skills-based hiring. Maybe I'll call on someone. Abby, I know you've done some work in this area. Do you feel like you've always been able to be hired based on your academic credentials, or how else have you signaled your no?
Actually, what came to mind first was getting a job in high school at a local department store based on experience I had working in a store my father owned that was a different kind of retail. and being able to just demonstrate skills transfer. Not knowing the term, of course, at the time.
Well, that's a really good point about the value of having clear ways to describe skills, because if you don't know how to describe what you know how to do, that makes it harder.
But I knew cash registers and I knew how to wait on customers, right?
Mhm. Anyone else want to share? Maybe this really speaks to the need for us to have more tools like this, but makes it more possible to get hired that way. Of course, I'm speaking to a lot of highly educated people, so I'm sure and you're working in education, so I think, tend to prioritize people with degrees. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the origins of this movement to do skills first hiring. And one of the things that I want to really ground this in is how this relates to equity. So one of the reasons that we really need to be focusing on ways to diversify the ways that employers make decisions is to address the bias that happens in hiring. So when we're all aware of legislation that's been passed that looks directly at anti-discrimination, whether this is the Civil Rights Act or things that have been done with the American with Disabilities Act. And that helps deal with explicit bias, where a group is being categorically excluded. There's also been a lot of work to figure out how to look at the implicit bias about the process in which hiring happens. So you think about things like when orchestras decided to make it so they couldn't see who was auditioning as a way to deal with implicit bias. But one of the challenges that we really deal with is that there's a lot that happens related to stereotypes. So even someone may not intend to be biasing their hiring practices, but if they see someone who looks like them, who has experience like them, they might be gravitating toward that person. So we need to figure out ways that we can get around the ways that bias inflects hiring. Next slide. So that's where the concept of skills first hiring comes in. And so I want to name, and you'll probably hear me stumble once or twice, that this is an evolution in terms, which really speaks to how much we are on the cutting edge of the development of this way of thinking about employment. So skills-based hiring was the term that everyone was using not too long ago for this. But one of the things that's been flagged is that when people say skills-based, it's implying this either or. Like, oh, I would pick skills over an education. And while we definitely want to diversify the different ways that an employer could evaluate somebody's knowledge, it's still valuable to know about someone's academic credentials. And so by using this term, we're really trying to figure out ways that employers can look more holistically at people and be evaluating with maybe skills being the first thing that you're thinking about. But the academic records still fit in. And that's important for our model of how we would be bringing together information from academic transcripts and other sources. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that's happening right now is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is trying to figure out how to solve this problem because they want to make sure that they're able to get talent. We've been having a lot of issues with skills gaps. And so employers are getting really creative thinking about how to handle this. And they have been ones who are really saying that one of their challenges is this data issue, which very much is in the purview of this particular task force. So they basically are looking at 3 different issues at the same time to try to figure out how to solve for this. So the first is to be able to get data together that has been vetted as being appropriate into a cohesive repository. And that's that learning and employment record, or LER. And that we may refer to it as the career passport, but that's what an LER actually is. The next thing that you would need to do is make sure that learners and workers have control over that information. So one of the things that is common in transcripts right now is that sort of under the ownership of the educational institution, and the student has to request it. For reasons of financial aid rules, that information has to pass. You may recall getting a sealed envelope that you weren't able to open up that have your transcript in it as a way to certify that you didn't monkey with it. But we know with tools like LinkedIn, people have gotten very used to curating things. So nowhere on my LinkedIn profile does it say that I worked at Pier 1, but I did, because that's not particularly relevant for the skill set that I have today. Although I am very good with a lot of eucalyptus because that was really what everything was covered with when I worked at Pier 1. So if we have to give people power over that, that actually changes the kind of technological infrastructure you need. And then the final thing, and this is actually the trickiest, is you have to be able to define those skills in ways that everybody knows what they are. And so that gets back to what I was mentioning with Abby's example, which is that if I don't know how to describe the skills that I have learned in a way that an employer is going to recognize them, it's very hard for us to shift in this way. So you have to actually tackle all three things to be able to really shift toward a skills first hiring framework. Next slide. So one of the things that I just want to really emphasize as we're thinking about what we could be doing is that we're not trying to turn eTranscript California into an LER, trying to have it do all the things we've already defined over the last number of months that would be necessary to pass information in all the academic and credit for prior learning contexts that we've already described, trying to make it also something that is employer facing where the student has control over the content might be really difficult. So what we're really thinking about is that we would take what this expanded eTranscript California, and it would pour into an LER. And that would be the career passport, where it's an add-on to what would be happening in eTran. So if you can talk about it that way, that may be helpful as we're sort of sorting out the options for what that additional component would be. All right, next slide. So now that I've given you sort of framing, I'm really excited to turn it over to Amber because she's going to help get us up to speed for how people have been tackling the issues of LERs in other states. Thank you, Amber.
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be joining you today. I am on almost the opposite coast from you. I reside in Pensacola Beach, Florida, and I've spent the last probably 12 years of my career working on the ability for students and learners to have skills, to be able to represent those skills out. And prior to coming to CBEN, I worked at Lumina Foundation, helped found the T3 Innovation Network. So I love seeing all of this work starting to bear fruit, and for all of us to be learning together how we empower learners and individuals with their skills data, again, so they can have that economic mobility. And so what I'm here to talk to you about today is just what we've been learning over the last 10 years about this movement. And in my particular role now, we have been supporting several states in implementing LERs and skills first hiring practices. And then also, we just want to point out also a sovereign nation, the Navajo Nation, is tackling this problem head on as well. And we've just been privileged to be along the journey, again, helping to support those initiatives, but also learning and sharing across the ecosystem. So what I wanted to frame up for you on the next slide is just across some of those initiatives, what we've been learning from about LER implementation in general, the bright spots, if you will, is that, again, similar to the brief, we're seeing this play out in real life, that employers really do want to shift to a skills first process to be able to hire people. But what they don't have are the new tools that they would need to have access to skills information. So they're still receiving resumes, or they're still receiving time on a job, or a job title that doesn't really tell them, again, what someone knows and what can they actually do. And so what we are seeing in response to that is education training providers saying, we actually have a lot of that learning. We're assessing that learning. We just haven't provided this to you before. And so early on, education providers saying, hey, what if I showed you that assessment? Or what if I gave you that skills definition and told you that I verified that? We saw employers go, that's great. We really would like to shift to having that types of information. And that allows us to, again, start to transition into a skills-based hiring practice. Two things that these last two items were really important to hear from employers as well. Employers tell us that they do trust education providers to validate skills. And I think this ran a little counter to narrative that sometimes we're hearing employers don't trust education. And really what they are not trusting is that credential title. Or again, I can't trust this proxy for those skills and competencies anymore. But they do tell us they trust the education provider to assess that learning and to tell them when somebody's mastered that skill set. They also tell us that they trust as Kathy mentioned, being able to have in a digital format, a verified format, that the digital nature of it allows them to trust and know that the information, the skills information they are receiving is coming from a true source. As you can imagine, and we hear this from them about LinkedIn, is sometimes they don't know if it's a true person, or they don't know if that's true information because nobody's verified that. And so in this digital trusted format that we've been able to build with LERs, we can say this is a real education provider or someone who is an expert enough to verify that and provide this data to you, and the employers are trusting that. So that's, again, some bright spots in this of why LERs are becoming the tool of choice to help shift and provide employers that information that they need. So as we've been thinking about this and thinking about the spot you're in and other state leaders, on the next slide, you will see a set of principles that we were lucky to help foster for the community. So 2 years ago, I interviewed a whole array of policy leaders. So not the technology people, but individuals who are charged with making a decision about how these systems should be set up, and said it, certainly we can talk about open standards and the technical pieces of this, but as a person who is thinking about, again, the policy and the broader infrastructure we're arranging, what do I need to keep in mind as I'm making decisions about the technology I'm producing and who gets to publish and all these really, again, technical questions. These are the 7 things that leaders told us were really important to keep in mind to be able to deliver on the promise of an LER and a career passport, and the way that you're thinking about it here in California too. So I'll just run through these really quick. The first one's pretty obvious, and so we don't probably need to spend too much time on it. But again, we want to make sure that leaders understand there are open data standards that allow this data to be published and shared between technology systems and data systems and platforms. But you got to make sure that you're asking your technology providers to follow those open standards. So again, while you don't need to know all the technicality of it, just make sure that you have those community defined open standards that ensure the data can move across any platform that the individual would like it to move through. Then also making sure we're just following the privacy and security, right? We want to make sure that individuals, while they can curate and move their data, we also know that this is, they need to trust that we're going to be responsible with their data, and that we provide the right amount of privacy and security protocols that they can reveal information that they want to the people that they want, but also respecting when they don't want particular things. So Kathy talked about if your one's not on her LinkedIn profile, well, that's Kathy's prerogative to say, in my LER, I want to share with an employer this piece of my learning employment history, but I don't need to send them everything because that's not what I want. So in this protocol and system, the learner and the individual resident gets to make those decisions. Unlock learning everywhere. And this is really where I think for a lot of folks getting into how do we maximize our ability to recognize talent. We have lots of people in our states, in our countries, and our residents that have talent. And we want to make sure that they get to use that in any way, again, that they would like to use for further education and employment. So a lot of this commitment is saying, how do we unlock learning, regardless where it comes from, so that LERs honor the full value and the full potential that someone brings to our society and to work. Universal access, we're going to get into this one in a little bit. This is a really important one when we think about how do we set up the system so that there's universal access. So if we are truly shifting to a system where people are going to need to have their skills recognized and people are trying to shift to skills-based hiring, how do we make sure everybody has an equal opportunity to access those systems, to have their LER, and for it to be something that is reasonable? So I always use the example here around sometimes the driver's license, and how do we have people access some of those things that we know they need to have to move about in the world? This kind of has to take that similar mindset that we want to provide access to people for, meaning states are taking some very, and we'll dive into this again, some very particular approaches to providing that access. Alignment, and I would say public and private partnerships here are good, is that it involves, this really does call everyone to the table and being a part of this and thinking about the employers, again, states, local and regional workforce boards, or local and regional governance and district leaders, that we all are aligned and have a shared vision to support and ensure the fidelity of the interoperability and the principles here that we've discussed. Making sure again that everyone understands that they have a role to play and bringing this forward, and that in the states that are doing this, again, there's public and private partnerships that are bringing this to life. That in most every state example we have so far, they're not building a wallet themselves. They're partnering with a private industry or a private technology firm to come in and do this, because we can't keep up fast enough with some of the technology or the scale to move as quickly if it were just to be built internally. And so folks interviewed and a part of this movement has said that it really is about a healthy marketplace where, in this one too, there's not one wallet or career passport to rule them all, recognizing that while states may set these up, there's globally wallets. And so people will need to, while they may get a wallet from California, they would need to then potentially move their data among multiple wallets and have global mobility. So that's the other piece there, why that last one is so important, is that we do probably have envision that you could have multiple wallets across the globe operating in the same state even. And that's an okay thing as long as we all follow interoperability principles and those open standards. The data can move where the individual needs it to. So that's a quick rundown of those principles. I know that was a lot to cover. Let's start to unpack some of these, and I just selected a couple, and we'll start with privacy and security on the next slide. Some ways that states are thinking about this and just some early lessons is early on. I think this felt very novel, and it is pretty novel when you think about the concept, right? That you can have a lifelong passport and all your learning and your skills can be in there. But folks were approaching it as this like very particular tool that needed its own set of privacy and security pieces. And really what we are learning is that when we just bundle this with the technology solutions that we're providing to our residents, whether that's when I enroll at college, I already sign on and say, for educational purposes, I know you're going to need to share my data with a student information system and an assessment or a learning management platform like Blackboard. And so by bundling it in, that this is just another digital tool for people to have to pursue their learning and gather that over time, bundling it within that means it needs to be interoperable with those systems, but it also starts to be, again, it's much easier to approach the privacy and security because it's the same standards that we give to those platforms as you would want to have for your career passport. It's very easy to start with the education and workforce systems because they are used to bundling those types of tools and offering those to their learners or their clients. And so being able to think about that, they've also probably already have their own data practices, their own data sharing agreements in place, and they know how to incorporate that into a LER type product into their existing systems and those existing data sharing agreements. So we weren't having to create new ones in those contexts. It was about adding in. Now, where there are new resources and a need to provide model guidance and so a lot of these states we're uncovering, there are people who are providing quality learning, states even paying for it, but they've not been asked to track the skills data or the credit in the way that we might need them to now. And so managing that learner data required us to take that model in, give them some of the language that was already developed by our education and workforce entities so that they could get on board more quickly and understand how to do that management process and contribute to someone's LER. And then also just being upfront with the user that this is, again, how we build trust. I will share with you, we've kind of seen both sides of the spectrum. Some folks are like, don't you already have this data? And I assumed I would be able to own it and control it. And then the complete flip side of saying like, well, this feels very big brother and how do you have my data? And so being able to just be very clear with people again about what this data is, where it lives, how they get to own and control it, and how it will be protected is just really critical for both sides of the equation there. So the next thing I wanted to make sure I highlighted and shared with you all from the lessons we've been learning and implementations in these states, and certainly again in Navajo, which is a sovereign nation. On the if the we can go to the next slide, that would be great. Again, back to this unlocking learning anywhere. If we think about all the places that learning happens, and certainly again, as a state, you fund a lot of this across a very vast ecosystem, right? California is a huge state, right? How do you think about how all that quality, how all those providers, again, are going to be able to take the information that they're doing to verify skills for learners and contribute to this? And this is where, again, the open standards come into play, is that if we are all using those open standards, means that no matter what system we purchase to do this process for us, I can still make the data move between those places and contribute to the LAR. But again, it kind of takes you to cast a wide net. So again, who are all the education organizations? So the example I might give is we've been working in the state of Alabama, and I know that was an example in the brief that you read. There's 16 state agencies that are administering dollars for education and training in the state. So how do we think about how all those agencies then support those education providers in moving this forward? And so there's three kind of main ways we see states approaching this. In that case, the state has said, we are going to just provide a state platform, a state wallet, so that all the education providers in the state can simply issue to it. They don't need to go purchase new technology. They are able to integrate and share their data according to privacy and security with the learner. And so that is where, again, it may feel a bit top down, but it really is the state saying this is important infrastructure for all of our education providers and all of our learners to have access to. So we're going to pay for it and we're going to provide it. Then we're also seeing some states take an approach where they're looking at their education providers and saying, we want you to be able to do this. We're going to provide the central digital wallet so that you can publish the learning records to that wallet. So almost like a state as an aggregator and providing that hub, or states as an enabler, which is saying, hey, we encourage all of you to issue LERs, and we encourage and incentivize that adoption and set more of the policy and funding opportunity where there's carrots, if you will. There's money to draw down from, and then there's kind of policy regulatory pieces to say, here's how you use that money to contribute to an LER, and we're going to make sure that that happens. So again, three different approaches. They all have what I like to call different levels of benefit, right? So if you think about unlocking learning everywhere, if I'm enabling people, what's going to get me the most level of benefit, meaning the most, in this case, the most learning to be transparent. And which of these models might, or you in California, you might come up with your own model that would unlock that learning. And then the next slide, I want to make sure we're just talking, this one really gets into the universal access question. So it's about unlocking that learning and then giving access to residents and thinking about, do they have to pay? Who are maybe the institutions have to pay, or does the state want to pay? And then again, thinking about that these will have, again, different levels of benefit and different levels of access depending on how you set this up. And so just being able to, again, think about the implications of that gets beyond the data moving necessarily, and thinking about how people are going to access this and use it and be able to have over time. And I think I have one more slide. I think I'm running out of time too, so I apologize if I'm moving through there. The big piece here is just saying, as we've been doing this again in the States, is taking this to existing processes. People are trying to do this very hard work of connecting individuals to work. And this is a new tool in their systems to do this. And so being able to say, how do we help this tool make your work more efficient, more productive, and enhance your collaboration? It gives you a new tool in that process. Making sure you're providing training to navigators across the ecosystem. This is no longer about checking a checklist of courses I took to fulfill a degree requirement. This is about, what do I know, what can I do, and how can I describe that and share that with someone? That's a very different way to think about navigating your career And so we need to shift the way that we do our advising and guidance. Again, thinking the states that are doing this really well are getting in and building and then doing lots of user design research iteratively, especially as we think about how people are trying to use this. Um, and I think states have a very important interest here. So my example is thinking about the platforms that are out there, and some of them have already been named. They are driven by what the employer demand is and what the employer wants, not what you need. So sometimes I get recommendations on platforms and I'm like, that is not the job I want. Like, where did you get this? Why did you think this was a match to me? I don't have any way to tell that platform, please stop sending me those types of jobs. They just keep sending them to me over and over and over. So what we've learned in designing this with states is that they can force the technology providers to be much more accommodating to what your residents need. So we hear from individuals who have disabilities that they would like to see particular things or have a way to disclose particular things in their LER, or maybe I want to include my visa, or maybe I want to think about, so being able to hear from your residents what they want and giving them power in the platform is something that a state with the public good mind is making sure that our technology companies are listening to. So I just would urge you to continue to push on that and be that conduit of public mindset and bringing that to the table. And just global mobility would be the last piece real quick of understanding that while you're going to do this in your state, again, this is happening across the globe. This is happening in other states. And the good news is we have had the first interstate like technical interoperability where it's like, I moved this badge from Alabama to Indiana. But what you will see announced probably early next week is that there are a couple states who are saying we're going to make this functional. We're going to do this with real people who are moving between our states. And the first two are going to go, and then there's 4 more to follow. So we would love to add California into that conversation and move that forward. So with that, I will stop and turn that over. This is probably a good one to see. Yeah, this is just what the Alabama wallet looks like, so you can see it. Do you want me to spin a minute?
That up and see if anyone has any questions. I think it is helpful to get to see what an LER looks like in practice. Sam, do you want to unmute and ask what you put into chat, and then Abby after that?
Yeah, this is really neat. Amber, is there a generally accepted framework that would start at the high level, like for the standard occupational code or the instructional program code, that would funnel down to a finite set of skills and competencies that faculty could have a discussion with industry folks when they're aligning course competencies with expected industry competencies, so they could have a conversation about those and make sure that the courses are meeting the industry needs and the industry needs are aligned with the course needs, and they could agree upon the competencies that line up.
Yeah, there's a variety of conversations happening about this. Certainly, in some states, they're not even addressing this. So they will, they're going to open up issuing digital wallets, and who knows what is going to be in those and what languages. So to Kathy's point of, I think it'll be interesting to see, like, can they do skills matching? Alabama has worked hard through a governance structure. They have 16 industry councils that we start with reviewing job descriptions and employer in-demand needs. And then we've created a whole ontology that underpins job descriptions and LERs and credentials in the state. So they can do that mapping. We meet quarterly with that group. And I was sharing with Kathy that because that governance structure is set up, we now can take more real-time data in to that group and say, instead of us nitpicking competency statements and trying to give all these folks perfect data, what we're doing now, so whenever an employer logs on and makes their job description in the triad, they can edit and tweak statements so we can see in real time where the labor market demand is shifting and changing, feed that back to the industry groups, who then say, oh, this is really significant, or that was like a one-time outlier. If it's significant enough, we're going to push that down to the colleges as well and say, here's real-time labor market information that's coming in. And so that's just some ways to think about that. There's a variety of approaches here. But it is, I think the taxonomy piece is too rigid for the dynamism in the labor market to say this is the exact statement that will be used no matter where it comes from. We just have too much happening to take that approach.
Mhm.
That's a very quick, there's a lot behind all that. I would love to
Yeah.
dive into some of this for you, but yeah.
Thank you.
That's your question. Abby? Had a hand up maybe?
Kathy, did you want me to jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, a few questions. And I also was wondering, as Sam did, about the skills taxonomy, common definitions, and want to believe, maybe this is more of a comment than a question, that we could come up with some that has some flexibility within it. So and that could, be malleable enough that it could change in high level enough with a dynamic labor market. But a question for you, and this is just so exciting. The examples you're using and the perspective you're giving kind of come from the education system. And this is a tool kind of coming from the education system. It links to an eTranscript. What have you seen states do for like participants from workforce programs who aren't not necessarily part of the education system, or usability for just regular people, current workers who are applying for other jobs and would want to use that? I'll
Yeah,
start.
definitely. So I definitely hit home the education part. When I say education, I mean anybody who's dispersing funds for education and training programs in the state. So this would be workforce training programs. This could be higher ed. This could be we've done it in K-12. We've done it in independent education and training providers, or like apprenticeships. So in Alabama, for instance, Toyota's apprenticeship program is not it's not a registered apprenticeship. It's one of the most high quality apprenticeships in the state. That all comes into here. So being able to see all of that learning. The other thing is people can provide self attestation. So I might come in and say, in my wallet, I want to say, actually, I know I can do this, and I'm going to upload this evidence that I have. And so it may not have the green check mark because it's a self attestation, but that is something that I can still add to my resume, provide evidence of. There's just not somebody who's verified that that's that I know and can do that yet. Now, we are seeing some colleges step in and say, hey, credit for prior learning, you did provide that evidence. I'm going to give you a green check mark. So Lawson State here in this example might say, we'll ping that. We'll verify that for you. And we'd like to enroll you and get you onto your next credential. We're starting to see some of those things happen, or your next, whatever that is, workforce credential, or across the people really like being able to add their attestations. We're really hearing the users really appreciating that too. One thing that we've also heard, but we don't have employers ready to do it yet, is they would like to have their work, like I did this on the job, my performance evaluation. And would my employer, instead of writing me a letter of recommendation, verify in my record that I have that skill? I think there's a lot of legal things to figure out for employers right now. And so they've not been willing to do that. But that's a conversation that started too.
Or certificates from courses taken on the job, or some evidence of learning. And how have you been vetting this with employers? I mean, a lot of people were really excited about digital badges, but employers really didn't care that much about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is where I think the interesting approach in Alabama has been that they call it the triad because it has I'm showing you the user's view of their wallet. On employers have a side of the triad, so they have a public infrastructure, so all the small and medium-sized employers also can produce skills-based job descriptions. So that's the job description data that's feeding in, along with here's the wallet, and then also a credential registry that shows, because if I'm going to make a recommended learning journey in this example for Sheridan, based on her skills, I'm gonna do that analysis using the credential registry that the state's created to tell her what her next learning journey might be. And we're about to layer in how much credit she might have waiting for her at that next set. Like, hey, you have your CNA. Did you know that Athens State is ready to give you 14 credits for that, and you can complete your RN degree. And then we can also show here's your recommended jobs, how much you would be making, all those kinds of things can show up in. But that's because this is, I would say this is more a talent marketplace than, because it's got a component of the wallet in it. But you're definitely going to want to, that's why I would say that alignment and building with employers at the same time that you're doing this with learners is key.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, could we hold on this and have James go next, and then maybe sort of wrap your comment to the next conversation? That'd be great. So James, if you'd like to share us a little bit more about what's happening in California, that would be great.
Yeah, awesome. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm James Regan. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Workforce Development here with the State of California's Government Operations Agency. And if we can please go to the next slide, I think I can share a little bit more about what that actually means. And so I work with a variety of partners across the state of California to support recruitment, hiring, and retention and learning and development efforts for all of our departments across the state government workforce. And really to share from an employer perspective here today, as well as a partner on this effort, is our goals are really to support positive career outcomes and create those pathways to economic mobility in a way that also promotes purpose-driven work of public sector, which all of us are trying to accomplish today. And then, of course, ensuring the state workforce reflects the people we serve, because diverse perspectives just leads to better decision-making and ultimately improve service delivery. And so one of the ways we are doing that ties into everything that we're talking about today, which is, if we are looking at the next slide, it's a little bit about skills first hiring. And so I don't know if we can move to the next slide, please. It's this earth-shattering idea of hiring based on skills. And we've been talking about this already all day today. So a little bit about what we're doing in the state of California as an employer is really assessing our civil service classifications, since skills first hiring is something that is relatively new, in particular to public sector entities. And so it's about removing unnecessary barriers to entry to employment in careers with us. And part of that is about taking into account the holistic picture of someone's skills, knowledge, and experience in a way that includes their education and training background and on-the-job skills that they've earned through experience. And then ultimately, as cliche as it sounds, our job is to prepare the workforce of the future and then invest in them with functional knowledge and skills to be successful. And when I talk to people about this, I say that skills first hiring is an innovation in public sector hiring that will help us accomplish all of our other innovations. Because we need the workforce to deal with the emerging technologies that we see all the time, to bring new and fresh ideas to the way that government operates, and to provide bigger, better, more equitable services than we've ever provided. And so when we're thinking about this in terms of skills first hiring from an employer perspective, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, then one of the ways that we are thinking about it is, and love the lead in and appreciate Abby for the lead in on questions about skills taxonomy, because it is one of the things that we're doing right now. We need to go through this, sort of distilling it down to 3 basic steps going through this process to identify a desired skills taxonomy. answering the question, how do we build the workforce of the future, and what skills and competencies are we looking for to do that? And then evaluating our existing state job requirements. Do they align? Yes or no? And then if no, how do we remove barriers to align those desired skills with the job requirements to open doors for people and ultimately create a more seamless career experience for anyone who would like to work with the state? And then ultimately implement skills-based or skills-first hiring strategies that take into account the holistic view of what an individual or an applicant brings to the table when they're pursuing a state career. And what policies can we change as an employer? How do we shift the focus to ultimately one that has an application process that is more user-centered? It truly breaks down barriers and is the most equitable can be. And then the big question that I talk with a lot of individuals about is how do we best assess for those skills during a skills first hiring process? Because part of the reason why public sector has a harder time in adopting skills first hiring is because of the merit-based civil service process. And so it's about coming up with an evolution of that process that accounts for skills holistically, while also preserving the natural fairness that exists within the civil service merit-based process. So all of that is a little bit of very high-level background on what we as the state of California's employer is doing. Also, for a little bit of context, it is about making a high impact through providing that opportunity for as many people as we can. Thinking about things like education pathways and career education and training providers for skills-based training and vocational programs and on-the-job training. How do we look at this in a way that supports the 250,000 positions that the state of California has, and simplifying the process across 150 departments that support 2,700 job types? So one of the things we're dealing with is the sheer volume and variety in approaching this in a way that really ends up serving the applicants and helps us build the workforce that will better serve Californians. And so after all that background, if you wouldn't mind hitting the next slide, I did want to talk a little bit about how we are thinking about this when it comes to supporting the next generation of the workforce, really going from student to job seeker or applicant. What we see as an employer is a huge variety of different materials that a particular applicant could upload. And the variety is sometimes what hurts for a hiring manager that has to review 150 applications for a position, or for an applicant that is applying to 150 different positions with the same materials or different materials that are being required for each one. And so it becomes chaotic really quickly. And so when you have your degrees, certifications, training, transcripts, resumes, training records, I mean, you could go down the list. This is in no way comprehensive, as we all know, as individuals who have gone through a job seeking process. The list goes on, and it ends up being very chaotic for an applicant, including applicants who have gone through a variety of degree programs, or a degree program that includes a transfer or multiple transfers. It becomes even more difficult. And then as we go to the next slide, something that, even taking it a step further, going from a student to a public sector job seeker adds additional requirements, which is why you see that right side of the graphic growing. In addition to all of the things you saw on the prior slide, transcripts, resumes, training records, degrees, you also have the added layer of civil service. For us as an employer, it requires another layer of civil service exams that you have to provide and prove that you've scored at a reachable level. and in some cases, state-issued licenses and certifications that are not always provided across departments. And so just thinking about how, as an employer, how we can make this application process less painful and also more convenient for all stakeholders involved in the entire talent pipeline and journey for an applicant that is now applying to be on our team. On the next slide is the way that we are thinking about very symbolically. The next slide shows a way that we are thinking about different technology tools in the toolbox. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Awesome. So imagine very symbolically, an LER could be a stabilizing factor, not necessarily solving all the complex problems that we are all here to solve, but a very good tool in the toolbox of solutions, potentially, and in a way that we as an employer and potentially other employers across the state may feel the same way, in that it takes work out of the process for applicants, for higher ed institutions and training providers that are probably constantly getting bombarded with requests for official transcripts, for training providers getting bombarded with requests for verified certifications, other employers being asked for a copy of training records that may not transfer automatically. With a tool like an LER provided to applicants and employers, it's something that could take the weight off, really. And it's something that we are looking at as an employer as well as we modernize the state's hiring process. And so I think that wraps it up for me today, but happy to answer any questions if we have time for that.
Absolutely, we can take time for questions.
Hearing none.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your sharing with us how this is getting started, and that visual of going from the triangle to the square is really helpful to think about why the LER would make a difference. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to pivot, and Erin Carter from our team is going to raise a set of issues for you. So what I'm going to encourage you to be doing is really thinking as Erin's talking about how this applies to your work, because right after she finishes, we're going to open up a Google Doc where we're going to be asking you to specifically record how your agency might work with an LER, and to have you start thinking about what you might want to recommend for how California could proceed with LER development. So take it away, Erin.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at a range of possible solutions or actions that can address this very big topic. The first solution centers around developing action plans, which may seem like a logical first step. The Skills in the States community of practice, which includes representatives from 22 states and 1 territory. They are focused on the skills first hiring movement, and they convene throughout this year and into early next year. They have a goal to share emerging best practices, challenges, successes, lessons learned, culminating in the development and implementation of these customized state action plans for its members. So although it's not a member of the community of practice, California can benefit from the lessons learned that the cohort will be sharing nationally. And we're already mirroring this work through the development of the action plans under the Master Plan for Career Education. Next slide. So this is leading to examples from early adopters that can be leveraged. The Skills in the States community of practice aims to bring the states to the table as employers, like we just saw, to generate this national blueprint for inclusion and innovation in response to workforce shortages. So like we just saw, the example that GovOps is setting as an early adopter can help inform other employers in the state on the steps that are needed to shift to skills first hiring practices. Next slide. Another solution involves creating skills toolkits. So partnering with CBEN and Center for Skills would allow California to engage in creating guidance and toolkits to support educators, workforce development groups, and employers in how they can define, train, and assess for skills. And California may also consider conducting a series of intake interviews with employers and with workforce development groups to clarify their interest in and awareness of skills-first hiring approaches, as well as identifying and documenting what practices that they may already have in place. Next slide. So on the very big topic of LERs, given this broad range of approaches, it's helpful to look at the ways that other states are addressing LER adoption and what we're learning from those approaches and implementation. So starting with the statewide approach, the Alabama Talent Triad that we heard about earlier, it's an example of implementing more of a consolidated technology solution. They started by establishing their statewide credential registry. That includes the skills that learners earn when completing credentials. Those skills are then organized in a library, and that library also contains skills that are required for in-demand jobs in the state. Then they created a job description generator and an employer portal that allows employers to create or update customized job descriptions based on that same skills library. Employers then can post jobs, they can match with candidates based on that skill. Then finally, Alabama developed a college and career exploration tool. So this is what really operates as an LER in the state. It allows students and job seekers to own, collect, and manage their own records of verified skills, their credentials, and any learning and work experiences within a digital wallet. So they're able to share and link their profiles directly to those skills-based job descriptions created by employers in the same system. This type of statewide approach really requires robust vetting of technology solutions. It requires identifying sustainable funding and providing training to a wide range of users across a wide range of both digital literacy and access considerations. Next slide, please. In contrast, Indiana took more of an exploratory or a pilot approach. They started by administering a survey across their public and private institutions to determine who's already engaged in issuing digital credentials, certifications, and badges. Then they explored the variety of technology tools that are being used across the state to issue and to curate those types of credentials, including learning management systems like Canvas, transcript systems like Parchment, and badge issuers such as Cradle-to-Career. And this led to a finding that their state was already using a wide range of vendors and approaches to capturing learning both within and outside of academic settings. So Indiana decided to focus really on helping employers understand the shift to skills-first hiring by providing guidance on how to write skills-based job descriptions, how to craft interview questions differently, and how to analyze incoming transcripts that are more LER or skills-based versus those traditional transcripts. Next slide. So if California went more of this exploratory route, it may involve the following activities: evaluating options for statewide credential registry, which we started talking about last month during the credit for prior learning topic. It could involve conducting a technology scan to see which tools are already in place in use throughout the state to share learner skills with employers. It could involve developing technical specifications for LERs that would allow eTranscript California to pass information along to that comprehensive learner worker record. And finally, engaging with employers to create those toolkits supporting a shift to skills-first hiring practices. Next slide. So next, Kathy is going to walk us through the interactive discussion around all these potential solutions.
So we've been telling you lots of information. I hope it's been useful. Also want to flag for members of the public that if you go to the Cradle-to-Career website, there's a background paper called California's Career Passport, which has a lot of the information that we shared today. But what I want to do is, if we could put the link in chat for our task force members to give you a website, a web address where you can go and fill in a form. So thank you, Angelique. So if you could click on that link, what we have are 3 things in this document for you to work on. I'm going to be quiet for about 5 minutes so you can fill it in. The first would be a place for each of you to reflect how your specific agency would be likely to use an LER. We didn't presume that we would really know how this fits in with the goals that each of your agencies have set. It might be hiring that you want to do, or it might be ways that you're helping students or people that you are training get access to work. So if you could fill that in. There's also a question about key considerations for implementing an LER in California, just anything that's occurred to you over the course of this discussion. And finally, the last question is basically, what should the task force be recommending? So Erin gave some very specific routes that we could go, a more exploratory route, or actually beginning to get rolling and trying to develop a solution. And so we would love to get your thoughts about what's appropriate there. So I'm going to be quiet and give everyone a chance to write for a little bit. And then if there are other questions that occur to you for either of our guest speakers, you can drop those in chat and we can have those primed to go for the discussion portion. I'm going to give you about 1 more minute to get your last thoughts in. All right, so for the benefit of members of the public who can't see this full document, I want to share some of the themes that are showing up across the board. So what's interesting that we're seeing from several of the education institutions is that there's a recognition that there's additional types of learning that are being cultivated. So for example, certificates that can be earned in K-12 or certifications in the context of community college. And so this would give a place for some of those additional credentials to live. There's an idea here that by creating this dialogue with employers, it just deepens the opportunities for collaboration between educators and employers. So it becomes a change in practice in a way, or an advancement in practice. I'm noting from both the four-year representatives that they're seeing that this could be used for their own hiring practices, so that it would be something they could pay forward for students, but also use in their own systems. I'm seeing from the labor agency that there is a real desire to use this in a number of different types of training that are provided through the labor agency, whether it's the public workforce system or WIOA or apprenticeship or labor management partnerships, even things that community-based organizations can do. So there's just a lot of different venues there. For organized labor, really as a way to work on empowering people and addressing issues of equity and hiring, as well as a way to get new information related to hiring. And then we're hearing from the Department of Rehabilitation that it would be important as a way for people to support the widely recognized forms of alternative learning, and that it would to address non-academic skills attainment. So we've got a lot of different ideas that surfaced for the key considerations. So in this place, I'm going to pause and I'm going to actually ask members of the task force to sort of share out, if you were going to highlight something that you wrote here, what would you really want us to take away about what we need to think about if we're going to do an LER in California? Abby.
Sure, I'll jump in. And I mean, we're on a pathway, and I think because of where this work emanates from and lives, and what we're hearing from other states of kind of situating this in the education system or out of the education system. I'd like to shake up that assumption, if it is a true assumption, and think about building an LER outside of the education system and have it really kind of focused on hiring for skills first hiring, private sector adoption, have it more with a kind of look and feel of a private sector tool. I mean, I'm just thinking of California and the kinds of jobs we have and the kinds of employers we have. I also like the approach of, and maybe this is the next question, of the sub-hybrid of exploratory and some early testing and early pilots. I mean, I think we have to talk to employers and vet concepts with employers and test with employers early and often, and would love to explore, instead of inventing our own, like, look at what the private sector is already doing, and seeing if we could build strategic alliances or partnerships. I know LinkedIn would love to talk to the state about this, and there may be other alternatives as well. But just thinking of more of a kind of private sector innovation feel to this than another education tool. And I love my colleagues in education. Yeah.
Jake, do you want to unmute and share your thought?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. And it's really timely, just thinking about all the different sources of skill development and training and just a huge range of places where this can come from. Having a place to put it and having a place where service providers, well, let me back up, where the people we serve, people with disabilities, our service providers and partners, and then employers, just all having some place to go to fulfill their part of the path, right? So it would just be really extremely valuable. And honestly, just thinking about the people we serve, it would be nice for them to be able to see everything that they have laid out and be able to just have a place to have all that they are bringing forward professionally, and then have employers be able to go in there and see it. It's just, I see a tremendous value for the people we serve. And then to echo Abby's point, starting with a proof of concept, something that can be developed with wide contribution to the problem statement, and then to that discovery and sort of the other pieces that go into developing something, I think is really key. Because if the private sector employers are not on board with this, it just feels like we really need them, right? We need everybody else too, but that group seems like a challenging group to get on the same page. So if we could figure out a way to do that, I think that would be key. Thank you.
So I saw some notes in here about softer skills, and how would we document those? I'm curious who made that comment, if you'd like to clarify how you feel that fits in with this.
Sure. In terms of I'm thinking about the softer skills in both the community college programs and CSU and UC and independent colleges that are hard to quantify. But, learning how to live and navigate in a multicultural society, communication skills that you gain through a variety of different experiences. So just wondering about how do you define that in such a way that it can be applied to a wide variety of experiences that are part of the education.
It's really almost even within education, being able to surface those 21st century skills that we always hear from employers. I don't know if anyone has any background with that. I don't know, Amber, if you could speak to how other states are addressing soft skills.
Yeah, I think this is really why we just launched the Center for Skills, Carrie, is thinking about the way that we're producing skills data and information really leads us back to our assessments, right? How are we, defining what people have to, and I'm going to use competency, what they know, what they're able to do with that knowledge, how they're able to show up and demonstrate that, and then how they can do that across multiple contexts. So that's how we talk about a competency and skills is kind of this like quick entrance point, right? But as you can imagine, I use nursing, for example, because they have a nursing essential as an ethic of care. And so how do I think about that showing up in blood pressure? Well, I have to have knowledge of the anatomy in the body and how blood moves through the body. I've got to have a skill to use the blood pressure cuff. Is it manual? Is it electronic? Do I put a cuff on? Do I approach my patient with care, saying, do you mind if I touch you? Is there a cross-cultural component that I need to understand and be able to, again, provide the appropriate care in the way the patient would want to receive it? And then the context of that might be an ER, it could be pediatrics, it could be, we think about our service members, it could be on the battlefield. So those are all things that allow us to bring that all to light and being very comprehensive about. That's why I think the data structure and the way that we allow people to fully come in and talk about what they know and can do, but also for education providers, they're doing a lot of this. We're finding, for instance, in one state that in the industry certification program for machinist, that the faculty were teaching a lot of those soft skills, but the machinist assessment for the industry certification didn't test for those, right? So we got to shore up that assessment conversation. Is that helpful?
Yes,
Kathy,
thank you. Appreciate it.
Kathy, I'll just add quickly to build on Amber and Carrie's question. I just dropped in the chat. America Succeeds has done their durable skills alignment. So they've actually looked at every single state. And if the states have any type of taxonomies around the soft skills or durable skills, and then that is being used by many states to actually intentionally build into their LER around if they're creating credentialing or digital badging. So Amber and I had talked about that, but I thought that kind of relates to your question, then also back to Abby mentioning, and Jake as well, mentioning some of the ideas of how you're defining taxonomies to increase the breadth of skills and recognition of the learning that's being done. So thank you. Kind of ties in nicely with what everyone has been saying.
Any other thoughts that are sort of bubbling to the surface for folks? So again, turning to the document, which for the folks that are from the public, we're really seeing some real caution in the recommendations of making sure that we've got clarity about whether employers would be on board for using it, for really making sure we understand the technology and things that are already underway so that we don't reinvent the wheel. But I don't see people saying, let's sit back and wait, that there's a couple of people advocating here that maybe we do a sort of a test run with a willing industry and see if we can see how this would work if we understood our technology solutions. Are there other points that other people have made that you'd want to surface about what would go into recommendations beyond what I've just summarized? Samuel.
Just wondering from the experience, maybe this is for Amber, if there are emerging really effective practices in the LER world where we're seeing a better success at career improvement or access to career improvement that's attributable to the LER approach.
That's a great question. When we think about the use case, and that's something I would encourage you all to do, and thinking about, again, having a vision for this and what it's supposed to do for the state is certainly a population level solution. But where we're seeing, again, it having this drastic impact on outcomes for people is, I love, it is the bulk of, if you think about the bulk of skills validation happens in education, formal education systems, but it's about that making all learning count and reaching populations of people who, for whatever reason, because our systems have been set up previously discriminatory, right? We used to not let everybody go to higher ed, and we used to not let everybody. So people are still learning, and it's about getting in those community-based organizations where rich skill development is happening and being able to empower them. That's where I think, for me at least, the real power has been in proving that out. Again, employers are excited about that. The thing that I would I caution people about, it's really easy when you start to implement these to say, well, let's just digitize something and get it out to the employer. but realizing that when you take something to the employer, you kind of get one shot, right? Like you get to come and say, I've got something new for you. So making sure that it's something they feel like they can trust. And that's why that verification is important, that there's actual skills data in there. This can't be about just taking usual records and putting them in a digital format. That doesn't help the employer much, and it doesn't help the employer connect with that talent. And so making sure the skills data is in there and verified. One of the, I'm going to talk about this from an education standpoint, but for instance, we sat down with one of the community colleges and said, okay, if your grading policy is 80% of these skills that the person learned, and you can't tell me which 80% of the skills, you can see now why employers are like, I don't know what that means. So how do we want to think about building trust with our employers for what we're providing today, saying it's mostly there, it's 80% there, or maybe it's 90% is the bar of which we're willing to put our name behind that until we get to a place where we're making sure everybody reaches mastery, no matter, you know, where they come from. So those are just some of the lessons, but I do think there's a lot of value in using these to, again, a lot of places are trying to figure out how do we increase labor force participation rates, which means, you know, some of these places where you have half the population of people not pursuing work or education, and how do we help them feel like they have things, they have skills, they have talent, they have things to contribute to society. And this gives us a way to validate that and give them a sense of belonging and give them, again, know we value them as people and for what they know and can do and can contribute.
That is the perfect place for us to wrap up today's meeting. We're at time. So our next meeting will be our final one. So there have been 2 subcommittees that have been working to develop recommendations related to tagging the A through G status of dual enrollment courses and building a preliminary post-secondary transcript standard. I'll also be working directly with Samuel Lee from MAP, who's working on the credit for prior learning work. We will be in conversation with a number of different entities so that we can bring forward some ideas related to how credit for prior learning will fit in. So at our next meeting in advance, you'll get a preliminary list of recommendations that will just go out to this group, so that we can really use that as spaghetti on the wall to sort of start roughing out what you really want the final recommendations to say. All right, so thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you next month.